Because one
Yeah.
of the questions that's often, and here's the thing, a lot of times with bias, it's because the right questions weren't asked. They just weren't asked. And somebody in the world would have asked them if they'd been in the room there. And so my questions that I start with, this is like basic starter kit, would be like, who trained this? And somebody in the world would have asked them if they'd been in the room there. And so my questions that I start with, this is like basic start. Was it a diverse group? Were they encouraged to ask different questions? Were they encouraged to interrogate? Is there a culture of ethical responsibility around asking the hard questions when you're setting up the AI? Is there and then, how you're collecting your data and stuff. And I think we, even as consumers in the world, as well as professionals who may work with AI or be adjacent to it, we can ask these questions too. Who is there? And then who are you testing the outputs with? Are you testing it with diverse groups? What is your feedback mechanism and your continuous improvement mechanism?
Reframing questions like what is the point to how can I apply this is part of our conversation where our guests emphasize the need to re-evaluate relevance in learning and AI applications. She is Rebeqa Rivers, a learning experience architect with a wide experience in people development, believing that the questions we ask shape the way we design. She is challenging traditional learning methods by focuses on how to equip learners to resolve their own obstacles. In our conversation, Rebeqa shares the importance of asking the right questions, especially in the context of AI training, and how we could do a better job in the process of seeking customer feedback by asking, what's one thing you will do to improve? She gave us some examples from real world about the implication of AI bias in fields like medicines, where incomplete data and feedback loops can lead to serious consequences. So please grab a cup of coffee or tea and feel comfortable to enjoy this episode with practical recommendations and takeaways. Welcome one more time to the Brilliantly Branded podcast.
Today in the Brilliantly Branded podcast, we have the privilege of welcoming a learning architect. She lives within the question, how can we make learning more satisfying and meaningful? She will give us more details about that. And actually, she is Rebeqa Rivers, who is reshaping the landscape of talent development and learning culture. And she has redefined learning design to architect the learning of the future. She was trusted by Fortune 500 companies, tech startups, NGOs around the globe. So she is actually constantly exploring all those tools and technologies, including gamification, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And that's the reason why she is here today, because she wanted to bring the two crucial topics. One is asking the right questions, that is key for everything. And the other one that she will share with us is the bias in AI. So how algorithms works in order to really foster this ethical and inclusive AI. So welcome, Rebeqa.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be here and to be with your listeners.
Thank you very much. And my first question, as I always say to my guests, if you please can introduce yourself to all our audience and share a bit about your journey and background, please.
Absolutely. Buckle up. It's a bit of a winding path. So I was born in Alaska in the United States, so up north, raised in a rural village of about 300 people. And then my start was actually in music education. So my bac was in opera singing, and then my master's in music education. And so I started my career with a voice studio, actually in Seattle. And I did coaching and singing training for professional touring and recording musicians, so for adults. So it was kind of like job training for musicians. We were preparing them for recording, preparing them for tour. And then somehow made an interesting jump from there, probably through my master's degree, where I studied research and asking the right questions. And I moved into architecting learning that is learner-centered learning systems for businesses. So this could be startups or even NGOs or large enterprises.
Well, that sounds very impressive, especially because coming from these two kind of a contrasting backgrounds, I
Yeah.
mean, music, and now learning solution architect. And actually, it will be very nice for you because some listeners don't know what is this about. So maybe if you can help us to clarify what this is exactly about, learning solutions architect.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting kind of emerging version of learning design field. So the architect, I'm going to give you the short answer and then the parts of it that I love, which kind of brings it alive. So that we could do the big picture learning for organizations. And so kind of like how an architect might create the blueprints for a building. But part of this is really understanding what it's going to be used for. So just like if an architect is building a house for, let's say, somebody who works in the music industry will use that. They might not make an office. They might create a music studio or a performance area in the home. And so it just like that with learning, you kind of have to figure out what is the specific need for this company and for these learners and change the design of what you're building. And then the aspects that I love about it most personally is we're part scientist. So we do a lot of this kind of rapid experimentation with actual people who use the products, which are learning products and learning programs. And then we sort of de-risk the final thing that will go out because we've worked out the bugs, we've worked out the problems, we've kind of got it targeted by the time it's launched. And then there's also, we work directly with real, we'll say customers, learners, whether sometimes they're in your company, they're employees, but sometimes they're your customers really out in the world who are buying your products and we're helping them learn how to use them, why you would use them. And I love it because I get to work directly with the people and get the feedback. And I was going to say I have to be curious, but I actually think I get the privilege of being curious constantly because there's always like things to improve. So I just get to talk to people and be like, oh, you're right. That doesn't work. We can do better. And then it's so satisfying if I can just take that feedback and create those loops of constant improvement. And then the final part I love is we get to solve mysteries. So I get to put on my Sherlock Holmes hat and go in and kind of investigate with everybody and gather clues and solve these problems. So I'm going to give you a story that will give you an example. So I worked with a company and they had a sales team, as many companies do. And they came to us and were like, we need you to build us a learning program about the products and services that we sell because our sales team is having trouble converting leads, the contacts that would be a likely sale, to the actual sale. And so we think they need to learn how to present the products and services more effectively. And so I put on my investigator hat and went in and actually talked to the salespeople and the people in the whole line of the whole process of the sale. And we learned that actually what had happened is that they had a new customer management system and the folks who were setting up the sales leads didn't know how to enter all of the data correctly and fully. And so you had just this database of sales leads that had incomplete data. So it might be missing their contact information or information about their company. So it's hard to contact them and sell to them. And so the conversions weren't happening. And so I had to go back to the company and be like, I solved the mystery. Your salespeople are excellent. They know your products and services. That's not the problem. If we just help folks know what exactly is expected, what's a complete entry for a lead, then I think this will help you convert them. And sure enough, when the leads were entered correctly, you saw a spike in conversions. And so this is kind of the mystery solving that I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, that clarified a lot what is this about, because actually is how you are finding these bottlenecks.
Yes.
That is, where is the point that is really damaging all the entire processes, and probably everybody is putting all the things on place, but where is that flex point that is actually not
Mm-hmm.
working, and that you can start to really realize and investigating. So you are having the hat of
Exactly.
of research as well. That is amazing. I love that process. And I think is a part of the things have brought to you a lot of challenges, because
Mm.
actually, well, you can share that with us, but my conception is how people can really understand that there needs to have an architecture behind that. So
That's
what
right.
are those challenges for you?
Well, actually, let's pull apart that previous example again. One of the challenges is assumptions that are made before maybe it even comes to me. So, for example, in that assumption, this is so common. I know your listeners who work in learning design are going to be, oh, yes, I totally know this happens, because we all experience it. But coming with the assumption of here's the problem and here's what needs to be solved. And sometimes they've got the problem correct. Like in that example, it was true. The conversion of leads to sales was not happening. But and then they misdiagnose maybe a solution, which is, it's common. It takes time to work those out. So it's nobody's fault that this happens. But sometimes the actual original problem is misdiagnosed as well. And then also the solution that they come asking for, like already with assumptions built in. And so one of the challenges is this is not just being curious myself, but also cultivating curiosity in the entire business, to be honest, because you have to have the people who are bringing you the business leaders often kind of cultivating curiosity about, can you go in and tell us what's going on and what you think would fix it? That would be a great start. Like no assumptions, just, hey, we have a problem. Can you go give us a report on what's happening and what you recommend? But then also even with the people at the front, because like, let's say I'm interviewing the people doing the sales, for them to be curious and not, sometimes even people can feel challenged when you're asking them about how they do their job. And like one of my big things is to never go in with judgment. Like, oh, you should have been entering this information correctly. Like, because what often happens is people weren't trained or they didn't know what was expected. They're entering the best that they knew, or they didn't know how, or the systems sometimes also don't work correctly. And so you enter it and it doesn't save. We've all had that kind of stuff happen. So to go in without judgment and with just heaps of curiosity. And I think also that's where some of the richness comes in, because you really get to talk to people and they start to just be transparent and open up. It's very rewarding. I enjoy it very much, as you could tell.
I can imagine. And it's incredible for me see how a challenge is inviting people to be curious and that connect with another of your specialities, that is actually asking the right questions. I'm so curious about that because I know that this is part of the things that you are very good on that. And I know that you don't judge, but I hope that I am doing the right questions as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. I first of all, thank you for such kind words. That was really encouraging to hear. And yes, I think any question is the start of an investigation. So it's already a good start wherever you begin. One of the things that I love about question asking is to focus on the person, which is actually something we don't often do. Because often in our schooling systems, and schooling systems around the world are quite different. So may not apply to everyone, but at least in the United States and a lot of people I've talked to in my research around education systems, we're often taught to ask questions about the topic or about the subject or about what we're learning. But it can be really interesting when you just shift the topic a little bit and ask the question about the person in regards to the topic, in regards to what we're learning.
I love that.
And from a business standpoint, here's a tiny example, and then I'll tell a story. If I ask somebody, what's the problem with this product? I will probably get a beautiful technical description of their opinion of but that's about the product, which is great. But the richness comes often when we either follow up that question or replace that question, depending on what we need, with what is one thing you would do to improve this product? Because then no one has ever hesitated when I've asked them that kind of question. They're like, oh, this thing is and it tells me what bothered them most. and it's already prioritized. This is the number one thing for them. And that tells you a lot more than a list of technical descriptions. And so I find it gets to the meat of like, this is the thing that bothered them in their experience. That's a negative posed question about a problem, but you can also do it about what was your favorite part about this product. And you get to see the world through their eyes for a second, so to speak.
Yeah. So do you think that should need a little bit of psychology behind?
Maybe.
I think yes.
Maybe it does. This was actually what I did a lot of my research on in graduate school was how you can because we were doing music education, but how you can study the same subject and the experience of the learner and actually their outcomes, like how fast they learn, how long they can retain stuff. It improves with these questions that are maybe a little bit psychology, as you just pointed out. But it kind of brings them into the process more than just kind of asking about things outside of them. Suddenly, you're contextualizing them in this thing, and it's so much more meaningful to all of us when we're asking, like, well, what does this mean to you? How is this relevant in your life? How will you use this skill?
Correct.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And in the sense of, in the sense of coming from you, I mean, with all this experience, and to give it kind of an advice to all these people that wanted to try to learn something from you, the way that you are doing that, actually, how do you advise people that really build those questions to make the right ones?
Mm-hmm. I love this question because you just highlighted an important part of learning that we all forget, which is that every time we're learning anything for work, for a sport, a hobby, a new language, we're always operating on a series of questions. And we forget that. And the key is that the type of questions we're asking ourselves either help or hurt our learning process. Most of the time, the questions we're trained to ask were what we were trained to do in school, and we take that through life. And so, for example, I think what we can do is reflect on the questions that we kind of, out of habit, react and ask ourselves. So, for example, we have this question a lot of us may have asked in school, like, what's the point of this? Which is actually not a bad question because it's getting to the relevance. But it doesn't really help you uncover the answer very easily. It's a little bit confrontational. It's like, well, what's the point of this? A helpful question helps you get to that answer about how is this relevant? Maybe like, how could I apply this in my life in the next 7 days or month or year?
Yeah.
And that helps you answer the question of relevance. It helps you like have some framework to answer it. Like, what's the point of this is a little bit, it's so open-ended, it's hard to answer. It's a little bit like, I'm helpless. But if you're like, okay, I have to do this training at work this week. Maybe I didn't select to do it, but how could I apply something I learned here in the next week? So for example, if I'm making a new recipe or something, which I cook a lot, is one of my hobbies. And I'm not saying I'm like fantastic at it, but I'm enthusiastic. So sometimes I try recipes that are like way outside my current skill set. So if I leave something on the stove too long and it overcooks, the less I'd be like, oh, I could say like, what could I learn for next time? Well, obviously I could learn about not overcooking, but maybe there's a broader lesson of I got distracted and forgot it was on the stove. So maybe I'll start setting alarms when I'm cooking, because for me, alarms work. They don't work for everybody, but you can sometimes take things out into a broader context.
Yeah, but now that you mention context, how important is when you are going to make a question, and in order to make that more accurate, really explain that context before this is relevant, or you can just arrive with a question, and if it is the right question, will be really people understand what is this about?
That's a great question. I wonder if it's different for different people, actually, based on what you just asked. I think that brings up a really good point, that the right question, we put quotes around that for a second, might be the wrong question for somebody else. So I think if I was going to zoom back a little bit and brainstorm on what you just said, Maybe the right question is the one that helps you look deeper and brings you toward maybe not even an answer, but an investigation of what's happening, or however you need to proceed forward. Because sometimes investigations are what's happening factually, and sometimes it's how am I feeling? Like whatever is helping you investigate what matters to you is probably the right question. Does that sound right to you?
Well, the thing is, from my side, is curiosity, as you will say. What is moving me to do sometime questions that, like, I don't know if I'm delivering the right context at the beginning to do the right questions. But now, learning from what you said is something that makes sense completely for me. Yes, makes sense. And
I think, I'm just you really gave me something to think about. I love that you asked that. I think that I'm going to reinforce what you already said. I think the question that makes you feel curious is the right one. And so maybe it comes to asking different types of questions until you find the one that's like, ooh, for you.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I'm always impressed with the people that are not prepared to do those questions, for example, on those events, and they just raise their hand and make an amazing question that you are wondering, I will never probably think about that. This is so brilliant. So for me, this is probably the part in you are really proof to yourself that you are good doing questions, I guess.
It's a really good point, because when you're at an event, sometimes there's like one or two questions the audience asks that really stick out in everyone's mind. Like it's like, oh yeah, that was. So there's something here about, and I had to do it through grad school and then follow up, is learning where to improve your question, because it is a skill. So if you haven't if your schooling didn't support a lot of asking curious questions and stuff like that, it may not be something we've learned in our schooling. And so some of us have professions that teach us that. I learned a lot from UX testing, actually, because they do this experience person-centered question asking. And as soon as I saw some of the questions, I was like, oh, they're beautiful, because they just get to the heart of the person's experience and they're so human. And I love UX testing sessions and being a person who is being like asked the questions, or the person asking, but also investigative and critical questions also are the ones that you see, like executives are known for asking different types of questions, and theirs are often kind of these critical questions, like show me the work behind that. And those also are fantastic for curiosity. And they require us to cultivate a little bit of resilience, because sometimes they're very scary to answer or receive, but also when we learn to ask them, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I can imagine. And actually now, talking about artificial intelligence, that is part of our challenges. And I'm doing some questions sometimes to, ChatGPT or all the applications that are using artificial intelligence to see what they are replying. And I'm curious about how your expertise, building this architecture and going to UX design and doing all those processes and bringing out artificial intelligence, what do you think that is a point of intersection between these two both?
Well, this is a very interesting space, and I will be curious what your listeners also think about this, because I've personally used artificial intelligence to help with designing learning experiences for different organizations, so kind of as a tool that kind of like helps you assemble and copy and stuff. And then I've also served as a learning science expert doing review for the model training. And so kind of like giving feedback to the model and reasoning and stuff, so it can, so it can understand, in the AI context, these are different words, but anyway, so that has been a lot of learning for me. But one of the things that's interesting, I'm just going to talk about the interesting pieces of AI for learning, is that in the real world, just like the question that you asked about what's the right question for different people, in the real world, all of us learn differently, because we have different personalities, preferences, but also we have different existing knowledge that we're building on, or sometimes even unlearning. If we learn something that maybe was counterproductive now, we might need to unlearn it and replace it with something that works better for the current situation. And so the potential benefit of using AI is when it's built correctly and can understand, it can help us scale a lot of options to meet the needs of different learners. And so suddenly, instead of going through a program that was built once and everybody goes through it the same, you go through a program that has 100 pathways for 100 different people. And that's kind of fascinating. And that is really hard to scale with just human design because of the sheer quantity. But then you get into, was it designed with bias? Is there quality control? Are we doing governance? So that's the counterbalance of the risk, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually there is my other question, and it's related a little bit with the bias, because who is behind of those teaching to the robots on or this learning process? What is happening there? I don't know if in your experience you have been experimented things that you can share with us as a kind of examples.
Yeah, let me start with a basic walkthrough, and there are AI specialists out there who have so much information on this. So I encourage everybody to do some research, but some of the areas where bias can come in, just to give us a framework for understanding, is when you're collecting the data. So if you collect data that's biased already or is not representative of your whole kind of population or target group, and then when you're organizing the data you've collected, bias can be introduced as well, because based on how you're labeling, categorizing, and understanding the data, how you're interpreting it, new biases can be introduced based on what you think it means, right? Then when you're training the AI models, you can introduce bias as well, because based on what you input it to say, this is correct, it can be biased what it thinks is correct. And then it outputs biased content based on what you've trained it to do. And then after launch as well, when what the AI produces out in the world, then you can have, whether it's being tested and getting feedback from a diverse audience out there to see and then also AI models can kind of drift over time towards bias as they receive biased feedback. So you have to have some kind of governance in that process, because as it goes out into what is a biased world, the feedback can reinforce biased behaviors and decisions. And so we want to see some kind of cleaning process after that. So I'm going to share an example to bring this to life. Most of my experience, I can't share all the details of everything I've worked on because it's proprietary, but most of what I've seen so far has been a lot of the collecting and organizing the data of what goes into the models. And so you're really looking at incomplete data sets, or data sets that were just gathered from a very small subset of people. A lot of the algorithms before AI, even a lot of the algorithms were trained inside tech companies. So you have, it's a pretty specific subset of people who, to a certain level maybe of education, have certain technical abilities, live in certain parts of the world where these tech companies operate, and that's who you're testing on. It's a pretty incomplete data set. And so even before AI, we saw algorithms being trained in various ways that were already biased. And this, the benefit of AI is the scale, but it also scales our biases so fast. So let me give you a story. So this is about, it's like an example. So in America, in the United States, before 1993, so not that long ago, about 21 years ago, it was standard practice in America to test medicines, like clinical testing, only on men. In 1993, they put in a law that said it has to be tested on women and all kinds of minority groups. It has to be tested on all types of people to make sure that the medicines are safe. To be clear, they still test mostly on postmenopausal women. So you still have this subset of not being sure how it will affect women of childbearing years. So just being clear. But what they had then is often the medicines would go to market, and then they would discover how it affected women then. But these were fully tested, human tested products. So let's break that down. If you use the medical data from that time period on clinical testing of medicines to train an AI model, you already have data collection bias because you have a completely incomplete data set. Yeah. Then you have organizing your data bias because they took something that was an incomplete data set and said, this is human effect, human trials. Well, it's not human trials, it's one gender trials.
Yeah, that is the problem. Yeah.
Right. And then you would release it to market. And then what's the follow-up feedback loop? At that point, your testing is done. You have put it in the market. So the follow-up feedback loop was often not very good for women to come say, I'm having a reaction to this medicine, because there were no trials happening anymore. And it was kind of like, no, it's safe. It was tested on people. And it was often dismissed. So you had bias in the feedback. And so you can imagine what would happen if you had an AI model that had the biases in every one of those phases and the advice that it would give out.
Yeah, no, it's a mess. Yeah, it become a mess. Yeah, wow. Yeah, that is part of the things that actually in terms of the algorithm and the educating those artificial intelligence, how that works and how that there is a gender behind that, that is actually actioned to make that change or actually to give the right information. So, well, I think we are still in a long way to discovering many things and especially doing something. I know that you are behind that part. So for me, it's very important to know that we have a female representation behind that. In part,
do what we can.
Exactly. And I think this is important, but in terms of, I don't know if we as a users of artificial intelligence are, have the capacity in some way to add value to that algorithms or not, or this is just something that happened behind the scenes. Do you know that?
Oh man, that is such a great question. And I love the fact that you're focusing on where we can have power in the situation of like AI situation. Sorry, that was a big word, but in the movement where AI is becoming part of our world. I'm going to loop it back and say it might come down to asking the right questions. Because one of the questions that's often, and here's the thing, a lot of times with bias, it's because the right questions weren't asked. They just weren't asked. And somebody in the world would have asked them if they'd been in the room there. And so my questions that I start with, this is like basic starter kit, would be like, who trained this? Was it a diverse group? Were they encouraged to ask different questions? Were they encouraged to interrogate? Is there a culture of ethical responsibility around asking the hard questions when you're setting up the AI? And then, how you're collecting your data and stuff. And I think we, even as consumers in the world, as well as professionals who may work with AI or be adjacent to it, we can ask these questions too. Who is there? And then who are you testing the outputs with? Are you testing it with diverse groups? What is your feedback mechanism and your continuous improvement mechanism? And so that's kind of about the getting diversity in the first part and then self-cleaning with the testing. And then also, what are your governance and guardrail mechanisms when you're building the AI, when you're using it in the world? And we can ask those questions quietly. We can ask it with our money about who we choose to work with. We can ask it in society, in our governments or whatever, but we can ask these questions in different ways.
Yeah, Rebecca, you're right. I mean, I think we need to actually put it our 2 cents in the process as well, because we are part of that. We are trying to do a lot of things as a humans, but the technology is behind us, or actually next to us in every day. So we need to be careful about all these kind of things and be aware about that. The things that we are saying and doing are affecting that in certain ways. So using the technology as a part of what is helping us instead of the things that are really going to exterminate us. So, well, Rebeqa, I wanted to ask you, just to start to wrap up, first giving to you, thank you for all the information that you have been sharing with us. I think it's very valuable, and we have been learning. I have been learning a lot from you. Thank you. And I just wanted to ask if you want to add something else to this conversation.
Oh, I just want to thank you so much for your excellent questions and our time here today, and your listeners. And I think I want to encourage all of us, you and me and everyone out there, to try and ask one curious question that surprises you this week. I think I would love if the world was just 2% more curious, and we can all do it in the next few days. And one of the things I love to do is connect people who are doing this great work around kind of curiosity thinking, curiosity systems thinking, artificial intelligence, learning design. And so I also would be curious if anybody wanted to share their question they asked or be part of a community that I have of people investigating this, if they'd feel free to email me at rebeqa@rebeqa.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for all your words, and we will for sure reaching out to you in order to learn more about that topic. It's very interesting. Thank you very much, Rebeqa.
Thanks so much, Maria.
We hope you have been inspired by this content and join us for future episodes of the Brilliantly Branded podcast. We will continue exploring the power of branding and the stories behind successful brands. And remember, if you know a woman who has built a successful brand with a unique approach and a story to share, please refer them to our podcast. We would love to learn from their experiences and share their story with our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of Brilliantly Branded, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, on our YouTube channel for more branding insights and women empowerment. Until the next episode, ciao ciao.